the advantages of these are that we keep them short. We get to focus our time in the classroom on putting our papers together and getting to write our papers and doing our research. You can also fast forward and rewind as you need to if you feel like you miss anything, and you can always watch the video again. This one is on Patrick Henry's famous speech, which is famous for giving us the words, "Give me liberty," causes of the war were. A little bit of background information on American protesting British new rules, and we end up with the Boston Massacre. We got to see the video of how that trial went. Eventually the troops leave Boston after the Boston Massacre, but the British keep trying to get new taxes on the Americans, and so they create the Tea Act. Makes tea expensive. People get really upset. We talked about whether or not the people involved with the Boston Tea Party were patriots or terrorists, but we know that they throw a significant amount of tea worth a significant amount of money into the harbor in Boston in the water, and as a result the British get upset and they create these things called the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts are noticed most for making it so that the government in Massachusetts is disbanded and the British take direct control of the government, and the Quartering Act, which makes it so that citizens of Boston are forced to house soldiers, the soldiers who are there to enforce the British laws that they don't like in the first place. So all of that's going on. There seems to be, we're building up towards a war. It almost seems kind of inevitable solidarity with the people in Massachusetts. And so in classic American fashion, they go to a tavern to have their own meetings because they've been disbanded by the British government. At the second meeting, Patrick Henry gets up to give his speech. Things that are noteworthy about the speech: it does not get recorded in live time. In other words, nobody wrote down what he was saying when he was saying it. Nobody knew that one of the most famous speeches in American history was about to be given, so nobody thought to write it down. And then once he got started, people were too entertained to stop and write it down, even though they knew that something important was happening. His basic message in the speech was that the people who were hoping for peace were foolish. He basically believed, Patrick Henry did, that the evidence was out, the jury was out. Since 1763, it's now 1775, so for 12 years, the British have consistently stuck their finger in the eye of the American public. They've refused to meet any of the American demands, and Patrick Henry says only a fool would think that after 12 years of being mistreated that the British were going to somehow realize the error of their ways and start treating the Americans with respect. He just says it's not going to happen. I don't know why we want to send another request for help or for fair treatment. They're not going to listen to us. All they're going to do is keep poking us in the eye, and I'm sick of it. And he goes on to say that you're giving me death. Now we can argue about the validity of a bunch of plantation owners who had slaves talking about the terrible life of a slave and not wanting to be slaves, and so wanting to fight a war for independence. But at the end of the day, Patrick Henry's speech was very convincing. Everyone who saw the speech felt it was one of the most impressive speeches they'd ever listened to. Even the people who disagreed strongly with Patrick Henry said it was one of the most eloquent and greatest speeches that they'd ever. He became very famous for the speech. The impact of the speech and why it might be considered one of the most important causes of the Revolutionary War is that Virginia publicly announced that they were going to be committed to Massachusetts. They were going to join Massachusetts in the struggle for independence. They agreed to raise a militia, which means get soldiers to fight for independence. So no longer was it Massachusetts versus Britain. No longer were the individual colonies being seen as having their own little struggles with the British government. Now the colonies were united. They had become a national force. They had decided, hey, we're all going to band together, because all of a sudden, instead of just Massachusetts fighting with the British government, we've got the entire 13 colonies deciding that they're going to band together in a united front and fight back against the British government. So this is the famous last paragraph of Patrick Henry's speech. He says, "The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, were peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of change and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not. Everyone stood up and applauded the speech after a couple moments of silence as people realized what a great speech they had just heard and were convinced that it was time for Virginia to get involved in the fight. What I'd like you to do at the bottom of your note taker is answer the question, why do you think those words would have inspired people to fight the British? Remember that you can read your notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next screencast.